Well, welcome to the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center's Curator's Corner. My name is Thorin Tritter. I am the Museum and Programming Director at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, which is located in Glen Cove, New York. As always, I'd like to start by reminding you that our building is open to the public, so I hope you will come and see the material that I covered today and material from other Curator's Corner in person in our galleries. And if you'd like to arrange a private tour, just give us a ring about a week in advance and we'll try to arrange that. I also want to, as always, encourage you to use the Q&A feature of Zoom to pose any questions that come up while I'm speaking, and I'll definitely make sure to look at them at the end of the talk. And as I started to do a couple of weeks ago, I want to continue to let you know that we are launching a Buy a Brick campaign where you can help HMTC and honor a family member or someone special through the placement of a personalized brick on our newly restored patio that is planned to overlook the Children's Memorial Garden. I think there's some information that's going to be sent out via email, but if you don't get our emails or if you're curious, just give us a call and or drop me an email and I will send you more information. I'll add that we are also always looking for sponsors of our public program series. If you would like to be a sponsor and be recognized for sponsoring one of our series, whether it's the Curator's Corner or other program series that we have planned, please give my colleague Gail Peck a call, the development director here at HMTC. Okay, on to our program today. Today, I would like to talk about this rather ugly racist caricature, which we show in our second gallery. The image was used by the Nazis to promote an exhibition that opened in Dusseldorf on May 24th, 1938, to highlight what the Nazis called degenerate music. Here you can see the caption that we include in our exhibition. We say, it says degenerate music, and that this is a cover from a schedule for the Reich Music Days, a traveling Nazi propaganda exhibition that characterized racially pure music versus degenerate music. And we include the location and the date of publication in Dusseldorf in 1938. The Nazis gained popular support in 1933 during a tumultuous time in Germany. One often cited reason for the tumult was the economy. And for sure, a banking crisis in 1931 led a number of large banks to collapse and for inflation to surge in Germany. Meanwhile, unemployment spiked so that by 1932, 30% of the German workforce was unemployed. And significantly, the Nazis responded to the economic concerns of the time and promoted themselves as the party that would get the economy started again and put people back to work. If you saw my Curator's Corner from last week, I showed this image and highlighted that there was this economic argument being made by the Nazi Party. But the Nazis also used the culture wars of the period to rally support to them, carving out a position as cultural conservatives and then using art and music as a way to highlight their political agenda. And today I want to talk about that cultural side of the tumult in Germany. And I should add at the start here that I feel the need to give a little bit of a broader background for this topic than I do in many of my Curator's Corners. And so I apologize if it seems in a few minutes that I'm going off on some strange tangent, but be assured we will come back to the central image that we're starting with. Okay, so I'd like to start by talking about the new abstract and impressionist art that blossomed across Europe at the end of the 19th and early 20th centuries, with work by artists like Vincent van Gogh or Paul Cézanne or Henri Matisse, to name but a few, or the Cubism of Picasso and George Braque, another wing of that new modern art movement. In the wake of World War I, a group of German artists broke with the Expressionists and pushed modern art in a new direction that was dubbed New Objectivity. Artists like Max Beckmann, Otto Dix, and George Gross sought to capture what they saw around them with a striking level of unsentimental reality. Their work included depictions of desperately gritty urban landscapes and crippled war veterans and even prostitution. Many Germans questioned the value of this art and of modern art in general, seeing modern art as morally bankrupt and incomprehensible. Kaiser Wilhelm II, for instance, criticized the Impressionist paintings as gutter painting. And in 1913, the Prussian House of Representatives, the largest state in Germany, passed a resolution against degenerate art. When the Nazis came to power in 1933, they highlighted the failures of the Weimar era, including the political structure, the economic policies, the loosening of moral values, and the art and music. But the criticism of modern art also fit into a larger nationalistic message of the Nazis, which elevated German heritage by excluding those that were labeled as outsiders or non-German. In terms of people, the Nazis, of course, glorified the supposed Aryan race, but labeled Jews, Roma and Sinti, and Slavs as outsiders who needed to be excluded. And of course, we know, later murdered. And in art, the Nazis celebrated classical Greek and Roman art, but saw modern art as contaminated by Jewish influences. They also opposed any art that offered a critical perspective of Germany. Any hint of criticism was seen as an attack against the German people. A painting like Otto Dix's War Cripples, for example, was labeled by the Nazis an insult to the German heroes of the Great War. But the Nazis did more than criticize. They enforced a unanimity of thought. In a process that the Nazis called Gleichschaltung, meaning coordination or synchronization, all aspects of German life were brought into line with the Nazi ideology. Some have said actually that a more accurate translation of Gleichschaltung in terms of function was actually Nazification. Infamously, non-approved books were burned. Professors and teachers who did not promote the Nazi vision were fired. Labor unions and social organizations were restructured to promote National Socialism. Even the symbol of the Red Cross, the German Red Cross, was altered to show a swastika-adorned German eagle holding the Red Cross. And in art museums, curators who had shown an interest in promoting modern art were replaced by Nazi Party members. In September of 1933, the Nazis established the Reich Culture Chamber, which included in its subgroups individuals from various artistic fields, including music, literature, film, visual arts, architecture, but only people who were racially pure and who agreed to promote the Nazi vision. Joseph Goebbels, the Reich Minister for Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, explained, only those who are members of a chamber are allowed to be productive in our cultural life. Membership is open only to those who fulfill the entrance conditions. In this way, all unwanted and damaging elements have been excluded. This was the Reich Culture Chamber. There was, at least initially, some uncertainty about what types of art and music were appropriate and what should be excluded. Nothing represents that uncertainty more than the case of Emil Nold. Nold was a German-Danish painter who became one of the leading expressionist painters in Germany before World War II. He was also an early supporter of the Nazi Party, though, who was openly anti-Semitic and criticized Jewish art. But unlike others who claimed that expressionism was Jewish or a Bolshevik art, Nold considered expressionism to be a distinctively Germanic style. And even after Hitler came to power, Nold had significant support from leading Nazis, including from Joseph Goebbels. However, Hitler finally did clarify what art was acceptable, declaring all forms of modernism as degenerate. Nolde's work was officially condemned, and in 1936, he was ordered to cease all artistic activity, although he secretly continued to paint in watercolors, paintings that he referred to as unpainted pictures. 1 year later, in 1937, the Nazis implemented a far more wide-scale cleansing of the art on view in German art museums, eventually seizing 20,000 works that were declared degenerate. These included more than 1,000 works by Emil Knoll, more than 500 by Max Beckmann, and a smaller number of works by people like Marc Chagall, Henri Matisse, Pablo Picasso, Vincent van Gogh, and many others who are recognized today as masters of modern art. Unsatisfied with just seizing these pictures, the Reich's Chamber of Visual Art organized a degenerate art exhibition, Entartete Kunst, with many of the seized works as a way to incite further revulsion against the perverse Jewish spirit, as they claimed, penetrating German culture. And here you see the cover from an exhibition catalog for that art exhibition. The Degenerate Art Exhibition and a sister exhibition about great German art both opened in Munich in July of 1937. While the great German art was beautifully displayed and curated, the degenerate art was placed in a small building where the art was packed together, often without frames and hung with simple cords. Mixed in with the art on the walls were slogans painted on the walls saying things like, "This is a revelation of Jewish racial soul," or "an insult to German womanhood," or "nature as seen by slack minds." So there was a direct message being given alongside the art. Huge crowds gathered to see this illegal art, which went on to be shown in 11 other German cities and was seen by more than 3 million people over the next 5 years. It remains today the most visited art exhibition of all time. Given the success of the Degenerate Art Exhibition, the Nazis looked for ways to highlight degenerate types of work in other art forms, including music. Thus, the launch of the Reich Music Days that we include in our caption. The Reich Music Days was a 7-day festival that opened in Dusseldorf on the 22nd of May in 1938, the anniversary of the German composer Richard Wagner's birthday. Joseph Goebbels described the event as a declaration of musical policy and principles. By the time the Reich Music Day Festival opened, the Nazi view of what music was acceptable was well known. Much as with visual artists, the Gleichschaltung policies had purged Jewish musicians and composers from orchestras and from performances. Jazz and swing music also had been banned because of the involvement of both Jews and Black artists who the Nazis believed were an inferior race. So the Reich Music Day Festival was held to celebrate German music that the Nazis heralded as culturally superior to all others. But much like the pairing of the German art, the Great German Art, and the Degenerate Art exhibitions that had been created in Munich in the previous year, the Reich Music Days event included the opening of an exhibition of degenerate music, Entartete Music, which was held at the Dusseldorf Art Palace. Curated by Hans Severus Ziegler, an early Nazi party member who had become one of the party's cultural leaders, the exhibition displayed portraits of band composers and offered listening booths where visitors could hear the degenerate music. And like in the Degenerate Art Exhibition, slogans criticized composers and their music, educating visitors about the dangers of this illicit music and the degenerate musicians. In the accompanying brochure, Ziegler wrote that the exhibition should bring about a clear decision for music as well as art, what was and is diseased, unhealthy, and highly dangerous in our music, and for that reason must be eliminated. He expanded on the idea and on that theme in a speech he gave at the opening of the show when he said, "What has been collected in this exhibition represents an effigy of wickedness, an effigy of arrogant Jewish impudence and complete spiritual insipidness." Composers included in the exhibition both Jewish musicians, foreign artists, and modernists, including the prolific German composer and violinist Paul Hindemith, the Austrian composer Alban Berg, and the Russian composer and conductor Igor Stravinsky, to name but a few. And the effigy of wickedness that Ziegler had highlighted was conveyed in the racist caricature that we show in our museum, which was shown on the title page of the exhibition's accompanying brochure. I've included the translation here of what it says on it, which is not much. The caricature depicts actually somebody who was well known, or a character who was well known at the time. The caricature depicts Johnny, a Black musician known at the time as the title figure in Ernst Krenek's opera Johnny Spielt auf, Johnny Strikes Up. On the brochure, Johnny had been mutated into a somewhat monkey-like being, bearing a Star of David rather than a carnation in the buttonhole. This image would become a prominent figure in Nazi propaganda and the symbol of degenerate music. As early as 1930, Ziegler had fumed against jazz. The man who was curating the exhibition had fumed against jazz, saying the genre was helping Black culture to victory. There was some irony that the symbol for Ziegler's exhibition came from a highly successful jazz opera that had debuted in Germany, in Leipzig, in 1927. I said that the Johnny Strikes Up was written and composed by the Austrian composer Ernst Krenek. Although labeled as a Jew by the Nazis, Krenek was not Jewish and had been born in Vienna to a father who had served in the Austro-Hungarian army before World War I. Krenek completed his jazz opera in 1926 with the Black jazz musician Johnny as the title character. The fact that the opera was based around the story of a Black musician was enough to bring criticism and attacks by the Nazi party. This is in 1926 and 27, well before Hitler comes to power, when the Nazis were a fringe minority party, but they attacked Krenek's opera. Vogue magazine described some of the early Nazi opposition when the opera was performed in the spring of 1928. They wrote, in Munich, for instance, the opera house was closed to the performance. And to be presented at all, it had to go to the Gaitner Plaza Theater. At the first performance, angry witnesses threw evil-smelling devices. At the second, ironic partisans of Hitler unloosed a cage full of white mice. After the show, crowds in the street outside threatened the audience for having willingly looked upon the Black Shame. Regardless of the Nazi opposition, the general public embraced the show. After a successful performance in Leipzig in 1927, it went on to be performed 421 times across Germany in the next 12 months. 421 times. In addition to the 1928 performance in Munich, it became widely heard throughout Europe, and in 1929 was performed at the Metropolitan Opera in Manhattan, in New York. Ernst Krenek became a household name. I believe actually that there is still a cigarette brand on the market in Austria named Johnny, a hint back to the popularity of Krenek's jazz opera. By the time that the Degenerate Music Exhibition opened in 1938, Krenek had fled from his homeland, leaving Austria in 1933 and eventually making it to the United States in 1938, where he taught music at a number of colleges and universities, starting with Vassar College. As for the larger Reich Music Days and the Degenerate Music Exhibition, they did not garner much attention in the German or foreign press. In contrast to the preceding art exhibition in Munich in 1937, both the Degenerate Music Exhibition and the larger Reich Music Days event were a failure for many followers of the Nazi cultural industry. Since many of the artists who were highlighted had already emigrated abroad, like Krenek, the event couldn't really lead to an effective prohibition. And since music, unlike painting or sculpture, could be reproduced anywhere, there was no way to confiscate the pieces that were highlighted. And while the exhibition was planned to be shown again in other cities, the outbreak of the war the following September precluded any repeat performance. However, both the Degenerate Art and the Degenerate Music exhibitions were significant steps in the Nazi effort to dehumanize Jews. Through these exhibitions, the Nazis promoted the view that Jewish contributions to German culture were not only insignificant, but actually were worthy of being eradicated from view. The public acceptance of that idea, that artistic works which had been valued highly just a few years earlier should by 1938 be destroyed, was a crucial step towards the Holocaust. It should not be a surprise that on November 9th and 10th, 1938, 6 months after the Degenerate Music exhibition opened in Dusseldorf, the German public either quietly watched or actively participated in the state-organized attack on Jewish stores, businesses, synagogues, and homes that we refer to now as Kristallnacht. In Dusseldorf, not only were Jewish businesses and synagogues attacked, 400 Jewish homes were vandalized. And by 1946, only 249 Jews out of a pre-war population of over 5,000 were alive in Dusseldorf. Those figures, of course, were repeated in almost every German city or town. The Degenerate Art and Music exhibition had shown there was widespread public support in Germany for the removal of Jewish art and music, paving the way for the removal of Jewish people. This image is a reminder of a process that eventually led to the murder of 6 million. The image, I think, is also notable for the way the Nazis managed to merge their racial hatred for Jews and Africans together on one photo. And they managed to turn art and music, which can so often be effectively used to build bridges between communities, to instead fuel hate. Let me close by recognizing another event that happened 3 years ago today, the shooting of the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh that killed 11 people and wounded 6 others. That event is a reminder of how much work there is still to do to combat hatred and anti-Semitism. The shooter 3 years ago was a white supremacist who first demonstrated his hate with words, but then escalated to murder. Today, we remember those victims at the Tree of Life Synagogue, along with the 6 million murdered in the Holocaust. And I know you join me in hoping that we can find ways to use words, art, and music to find common ground with others and to diffuse hatred. Okay, I will stop there. Thank you for watching. If you have questions, and I think there are some, please type them into the Q&A window. Before I get to those, though, as always, let me mention a few of our other upcoming programs. Tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock, we're hosting a panel discussion with 3 women who've recently published books that explore the stories of various individuals who returned to Germany and other European nations where they or their relatives had been forced out during the Holocaust. We'll be talking about how people reclaim their heritage and how the descendants of both victims and perpetrators can process the past. And on Tuesday, next Tuesday, November 2nd, I'll be interviewing Rebecca Frankel about her newest book, which recounts an amazing tale of perseverance, bravery, and love as it follows one particular family as they escaped from the Nazis and eventually settled in the United States. And one more program to mention, next Wednesday, I will be back with my next Curator's Corner to talk about the Yellow Star. We have one displayed in our gallery, but I think they are well known as a symbol of discrimination, hate, and dehumanization from the Nazis. As always, you can find more details about these programs and a full list of our upcoming schedule on our website at www.hmtcli.org. And of course, I hope you'll go to our website, make a contribution, or reach out to my colleague, Gail Peck, to see if you'd be willing to sponsor one of our program series. Okay, let me look at your questions. Let me pop this down. Okay, so I see a couple of comments here. Oh, sorry, there's quite a bit. somebody pointing out that there's anti-Semitism on Long Island and in New York City. The violence towards Jews continues. As I tried to suggest at the end, there's still much work to be done. And as to the questions, somebody mentions that Arthur Sisek, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, was wanted by the Nazis for his art propaganda of the party, fleeing to the US and settling in Connecticut. I don't know his story, but I'll definitely look it up. Do you know how the artists whose work wasn't allowed by the Nazis and who immigrated to other countries were treated in the countries they moved to? So just in terms of the art, the Nazis sold a large amount of the art that was confiscated in a massive sale that they promised wasn't going to generate money for their military. They said it was going to be used for art museums, but indeed it was used for the military. And it was those paintings went to art dealers across Europe and in other countries. So the view that the Nazi view of what art was acceptable was not one that was agreed on universally. As to the artists themselves who managed to get away, again, many other countries and art lovers did not embrace the Nazi view, but within Nazi-controlled Europe, in Germany and Austria, the Nazi view reigned. What was the response by German artists and musicians before and after the Nazi came to power in attempts to ban modern art and music? I mean, the culture clubs that were created, which allowed German artists to continue working, if you were not a member of one of those culture clubs, you could not work. And while there was some opposition, the fact is the expulsion of Jews from the industry and from the fields undercut much of the opposition, and the German people seemed to go along with the criticism. The people who flocked to the exhibitions were not flocking to the art exhibition to issue praise for those artists. They were agreeing with the oppositional view. Is it possible that German people who admired modern so-called degenerate art attended the exhibition in order to be able to view what would otherwise not be exhibited? You know, it's possible, but I think the general sense was people went because it was illicit. There was something kind of secretive about it. They went to see what they weren't going to be able to see, but they did not tend to embrace the idea that these artists should be heralded as great artists. They went to see it because it was secretive and illegal, and they may have thought some of the art was good, but mostly the art was portrayed in such a way to highlight its degenerate character, with the slogans on the wall, with comparisons that were given to people who were insane, all kinds of ways. So I don't think most people who went to see it admired it. Do we see similarities between the so-called degenerate music and the fear of rock and roll in the early days in the US during the 1950s, particularly in particular states? I think the criticism of rock and roll or even rap doesn't come near the scale of what was being used by the Nazis. And the Nazis were really trying to use, first of all, to completely ban this music, and also to use it to highlight a racial characterization that maybe there were hints of in the way Southern racists in the 1950s might have seen Elvis's music or music by African-American singers, but I think it was just on a completely different level. Sorry. Somebody's saying that it's the first person, Arthur Schick. I'll look him up. I'm interested to see it. How were the banned artists received after the Holocaust by Germans? There was a return actually in Germany to embracing the talents of modern artists. I don't think you could find a lingering effect after the war. Many of the German artists who were banned were later awarded honorific titles and such. So it's a strange period where for a while people's views of art were shifted, but they seem to swing back. What percentage of German artists were affected by the ban? Frank, I'm sorry, I don't know a number. I don't know that. The ban was really against anybody who was a modernist or an expressionist painter, and there certainly were a number of those. And the largest number of confiscated art was by German artists, particularly Nold and Beckmann. Nazis frequently frequented cabarets and jazz clubs. How do you reconcile the attendance with Nazi degenerate music? Sherry, I think actually it's quite the opposite. The Nazis attacked the cabarets and jazz clubs as inappropriate. They closed down the most famous jazz club in Berlin very quickly and turned it into Nazi headquarters. They saw the cabaret culture of the Weimar years as something that needed to be gotten rid of. So while some Nazis may have gone to cabaret clubs while they existed and might have listened to jazz, I think it's something where the Nazi party message was that those were not places to frequent. Okay, well, thanks very much for tuning in, and thanks for your questions. I look forward to seeing you at some of our other programs soon. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.